Welcome to NTFLive, everyone. It's wonderful that you took the time to come and talk about how to create safe spaces for nurses in practice. And I'm thrilled to have an incredible portfolio of speakers that cross the country, as well as provide us with a variety of different perspectives. And I'm going to introduce them one at a time as they are speaking. But what I thought we'd start by doing is getting a sense of our audience. So I'm going to launch a poll question here, and please fill that out. I'll launch it now so we can get a sense of who's who. Oh, wonderful. So primarily nursing students and nurse educators. That's exciting. That's exactly who we want here. So I'll end the poll and start with an introduction of our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Kim Ritchie, who is an assistant professor in the Trent Fleming School of Nursing and is a registered nurse with over 20 years of clinical and leadership experience. She completed a PhD in rehabilitation science at Queen's University and a postdoctoral fellowship in the Trauma and Recovery Lab at McMaster University under the supervision of Dr. Margaret McKinnon and Dr. Ruth Lanius. Dr. Ritchie's research focuses on mental health and trauma in high-risk occupations such as healthcare, public safety, and older veterans. So welcome, Dr. Ritchie, and I'll just start the slides here. And it's all yours, Kim.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you so much for the invitation and introduction. I'm just not able to move the slides. I'm going to just try requesting control again.
Sure, there we go. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm just going to go back one slide temporarily, Kim, just to acknowledge the lands on which I practice and from where I am hosting this session. It's a Secwepemc Nation, and we are blessed to be able to work on this beautiful land here in Kamloops. And I welcome anyone who's interested to share their acknowledgement in the chat if you care to do so. Thank you. Kim, carry on.
Okay. I wanted to start my presentation today. Just going to go back one slide. There we go. The presentation today is really going to focus on a project we've been working on over the past few years. And it's really to look at the mental health of healthcare workers during the pandemic and through this post-pandemic period. I'd also like to acknowledge that this project has a very large team behind it and has been involved over the past 3 years. So as we all know, healthcare workers really served on the front lines during the pandemic, and they really faced a lot of new situations, very unprecedented. I think we've heard that word a number of times, and extraordinary types of work-related stress. And if I can just take you back for a moment, nobody wants to go back to the beginning of the pandemic, but just even for a brief moment, just to kind of situate ourselves back into that part of our world and how it changed so quickly. Oops. Oh, there we go. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, if you remember, there was a lot of uncertainty about this new virus that we really didn't know much about. And if you recall, healthcare workers were really on that front line of having to work in a healthcare environment with this unknown virus. And not only did we not know much about it, we didn't know much about its transmission. And there was a lot of fear for your own health, but even more so for your family and friends. There was also a number of new moral dilemmas, and that's one thing that I'll focus a little bit on during this presentation. But one of the new moral dilemmas that came about very quickly was having to allocate life-saving equipment. And that was new for many healthcare providers in that type of high-stakes environment. We also, as healthcare providers, really faced a lot of severe staffing shortages and increased workload. during the pandemic that really have only worsened into this post-pandemic period. And when you look at all of these different types of stressors, the cumulative weight of them has really taken a toll on their mental health. So early in 2021, as I said, we started this research project, and we were collecting data about the impact of the pandemic on frontline healthcare providers. We recruited healthcare providers from across Canada, and participants had the option whether to complete a survey only or a survey in a virtual semi-structured interview. Overall, we had over 1,100 surveys completed, of which 39% were nurses. And if we can just go back one more slide, I think it's just jumping ahead just a little bit. Sorry, there we go. So when we look specifically at nurses, one of the things we found that almost 1 in 2, or just over 46% of the nurses we surveyed met the criteria for probable diagnosis of PTSD. We also found that 7 in 10 nurses surveyed reported clinically significant levels of depression, anxiety, and or stress. And that about 7 in 10 reported feeling numb, detached from other people, from their activities, and from their surroundings, another indicator of mental health. 4 in 10 reported feeling guilty or unable to stop blaming themselves for something they perceived as a morally injurious event during the pandemic specifically. And the last stat there is, I think, one of the really alarming ones, that nearly 1 in 2 healthcare workers globally at that point were considering leaving their position due to moral distress. And we also found that the healthcare workers that were considering leaving also had higher levels of all of the mental health indicators that I just talked about: PTSD, depression, anxiety, and stress. So as I mentioned, moral injury was one of the things that we really wanted to learn a little bit more about during the pandemic, and it was a fairly significant part of the project. And this is a term that was originally conceptualized in the military, but it's now recognized in other types of occupations that have similar types of high stakes work environments, such as public safety providers, and now more recently, healthcare providers. And broadly speaking, moral injury is really the psychological, social, and spiritual distress that results from experiencing a violation of deeply held morals and values. And when we talk about these types of situations, what we talk about is potentially morally injurious experiences, or PMIs. And PMIs are classified most of the time in 3 different ways. The first one is an act of commission. So something I have done that I feel has transgressed my own moral values, or not done that transgresses my moral values. Witnessing somebody else do something that transgresses my moral values. And then the last time is an experience of betrayal. And that experience is done by somebody who you trust and is also in a position of high authority. And so when looking at moral injury, why is so much written about it more recently and through the pandemic? Because it has a number of mental health impacts. And it can result in significant psychological impairment, and injury. It includes emotional distress. There's higher rates of anxiety, PTSD, and depression associated with moral injury. Also, a number of functional problems such as sleep disruption, insomnia, and just overall functioning in personal and professional lives. One of the other things during our study is we did some interviews, and we also had a number of qualitative components to our studies, even in the survey. And in there, healthcare providers were asked about the worst event that in which something happened during the pandemic, in terms of something they did, or whether they witnessed something or involved in an event that went against their moral values or beliefs. And so we did an analysis of all of these 124 responses, and we represented it here in 3 different thematic groups. And I'll go through each one just in a little bit more detail. And it includes a quote there by one of the participants in our study just to illustrate what it was about. And so the first one was patient-related events. And this was the types of situations that described a PME, or a potentially morally injurious experience, in which the healthcare providers perceived that patients received a lower quality of care than what they would normally deem acceptable or usual care. And in many of these events, the healthcare providers reported that they felt they were placed in a situation in which they really didn't have a lot of choices. There was a lot of external factors. Most commonly, it was decreased staffing that resulted in a situation where they felt they weren't able to deliver the care that they felt was important for them, and that transgressed their own moral values. And so this was another type of example. Oh, sorry. Um, the other type of example that resulted in these patient-related events was during the pandemic, there was restrictions sometimes placed on patient care procedures that were aerosol generating, or having to put and don on extra layers of PPE. And in both of those situations, sometimes that delayed care and sometimes emergent care. And that again could result either in a high risk of patient harm or actual patient harm. And those events again transgress the healthcare provider's moral values of wanting to help the person in the situation, but feeling that they couldn't because of either the restrictions or having to don extra layers of PPE. The next theme was around interpersonal events. And what we heard was there was multiple incidents of bullying, harassment, or acting in really just a sort of an unprofessional or uncaring manner towards colleagues or between leadership and frontline during the pandemic. And these were described as potentially morally injurious as well. That the healthcare providers said really left them feeling incompetent or demoralized, and really transgress that value of trying to act in a professional manner, or feeling in terms, especially in terms of leadership, that there was this moral obligation to treat each other with respect and not in this unprofessional way. And then the last one was organization. And this one, in most situations, what we were heard about was the high workloads over the course of the pandemic. And because of the high workloads, in many cases, it also had decreased levels of staffing. And so that meant that staff was responsible for caring for more people than they felt that they were able to care for. And this really was described in terms of a betrayal, where they believed that there was an expectation on the part of the organization or the system to provide adequate levels of staffing. But in many cases, it just wasn't, it simply wasn't available for many reasons, as we all know. And so not only did they suffer exhaustion and burnout as a result of these situations, but also felt at the same time that they were unable to deliver the care that they felt was necessary, and that transgressed that moral value too. So although, as we showed earlier, moral injury can result in many different types of psychological and functional consequences, we've also found it to be associated with intention to leave one's own organization and or their profession. We've also found in our research that both moral injury and moral distress strongly predict PTSD, and the combined impact of both of them explain 89% of the variance in PTSD symptoms, which is very high as well. So there's a strong association between these, which only adds the I guess the weight of the types of impacts that these types of situations can result in terms of psychological impairment. Our research has also more recently demonstrated a strong connection between moral injury and moral distress and organizational support. So organizations that were perceived as having increased or being more supportive were also associated with reduced moral injury and moral distress. So there seems to be a strong relationship around organization and moral injury, moral distress. And I should just point out, I didn't speak specifically about moral distress earlier, but moral distress is a related term to moral injury. It's not clear where one ends and one begins. There's some um, theoretical thoughts about that, but they're not well defined terms. Moral distress comes out of the nursing literature in about the 1980s, and again is thought to be the transgression of one's own moral values. So we often talk about them the same, overlapping or individually, but they still have to be worked out conceptually. So because of all of the mental health impacts that I just described, we decided to create some resources to help healthcare providers. And so when we created these, we were really thinking about healthcare providers. We wanted things to be very accessible for somebody, no matter what time of day, and easily digestible. So if somebody came home from their shift, it was the middle of the night, and they really wanted something that they could use in the moment to help their mental health. We wanted this to be available for them. We also wanted to support organizations because of the relationship that I just described between organizations and healthcare provider mental health. So I'll just briefly go through a few of the resources we've developed, but they're all available on our website, which is Healthcare Salute. It's on the bottom of the screen. And they're free of charge, as I said. They're available both in English and French. And you can go in and use them. Some are downloadable, and you can scroll through many different types of things there. One of the things that's on our website that I wanted to point out is that one of the questions we asked in our interviews was, if you were to seek mental health treatment for yourself, what is the one most important thing that you would want your healthcare provider to know? And what everyone in our sample said is they wanted them to know about the types of work they did, the types of challenges they faced during the pandemic, and just in the course of their work. And so because of that, we developed a whole video series of different types of healthcare providers, just talking about their work and the types of challenges they have faced during the pandemic and the impact of those on their mental health. And our hope for that, it was really to start to normalize the conversation and to destigmatize some of the mental health challenges that are faced in the workplace. This is our Care for Carers social media campaign. And this again is for healthcare providers, meant to be just very small animated short videos that can of mental health resources that can be done in the moment. So the one with the hand it's a raisin in the hand, and it's about feeling the raisin, being very present and in the moment, as different techniques in order to just sort of de-stress and find some ways to help you to, I guess, experience less stress in the moment. And then the last one, we've developed a few resources for organizations. And this again comes from the data we have collected. We have a series of guidelines and recommendations for organizations on how they can enhance healthcare providers' mental health. We also have a trauma-informed care curriculum that we've also developed on there that can be used by organizations. And that's it.
Always forget to take myself off mute. Thank you so much, Kim. It's nice to start with a theoretical framework so that we have a basis by which we can all move forward together. So I'm grateful to you for starting us out. Next up is Victoria Schmid, who is the first CEO of Switch BC, Safety, Wellbeing, Innovation, Training, and Collaboration in Healthcare. Switch BC was created to represent unions, employers, doctors of BC, the Ministry of Health, and WorkSafe BC as a collaborative force for change. Its mandate is to support the health, safety, and well-being of the over 330,000 people who work in healthcare in BC. Victoria has a Master of Health Studies and Leadership and a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition. We welcome you, Victoria, and thank you for taking this time to speak with us.
Thanks so much for having me. And I have to confess, I feel like a bit of an interloper because I'm not a nurse. And so I will share that I'm always a little bit nervous to speak in a room full of the expertise of nurses, but I do believe so strongly that the solutions we need in healthcare are system solutions, and that those solutions apply to everyone who works in healthcare. I'll also share that I'm married to a nurse, so I hope that I can kind of be welcomed into the realm of the nursing world as kind of an ad hoc member. I'm going to talk a little bit about psychological safety today, but really just it's a primer because psychological safety has a lot to it, and there's a lot of information. So today I just want to talk a little bit at the high level about the different aspects of psychological safety, why it's so important, and how we start to get more psychological safety into our work environments. If you want an in-depth chat about psychological safety, Judy and I actually had a chance to be on the Safe Space Made Simple podcast last week with Trace Hobson, and you're welcome to go check out the latest episode he has up on his webpage and listen to that podcast for more conversation around psychological safety. So what I want to share about psychological safety is that there's really a lot going on in this space. So Kim has laid such a great foundation talking about moral injury in the workplace and the impact that that has on so many aspects of how we come to work, how we do our work, and how long we stay in the workplace. And the reason I want to bring in a conversation around psychological safety is because psychological safety for me is really one of the best ways that we combat moral injury. And not only in the creation of psychological safe workplaces can we prevent, can we fight the moral injury that we're seeing in the workplace, but we actually can prevent moral injury, which I think is where we actually want to move to from a healthcare system. So at the individual level, psychological safety really is around that ability to have autonomy, some agency in your workplace, some voice, the ability to connect with the people around you, to do that in a way that feels safe, in a way that you can be vulnerable, and to feel like you actually have the skills and the tools to do your job in the way you need to do it. The reason I have self-compassion starred there is because there is a growing body of evidence around self-compassion as a catalyst for psychological safety. And I say that because what they're finding around self-compassion is the more self-compassion you can have for yourself, the more self-compassion you can have for the people around you. And that actually has a huge effect on the amount of psychological safety in the workplace. And I'll bring us back to that in a little while. As a team, psychological safety is really about, can I trust you to have my back? Can I trust you to help me when I'm in a sticky situation? Can I trust you that when I raise a mistake I've made, you're actually going to support me and not call me out on that? And Amy Edmondson's work around team psychological safety has been really important in shaping up the thinking around psychological safety. In workplaces, we want to actually create work environments that actually promote and support psychological safety. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can do that. So really how we interact with each other on a daily basis in a way that creates that safety becomes really important. Now, I'm not going to go into the 13 factors on psychological health and safety because there's a lot of them. Some of them support psychological safety, some threaten it. What I really want to touch on is that there's two factors that they've added that are very specific to the healthcare work environment. And so this is protection from that moral distress or moral injury that Kim talked about, and the support for psychological self-care. And that becomes really important for us in terms of how we support people coming into the workplace so that we can prevent that moral distress before it happens, and how we support people to actually take care of themselves and really take care of their mental health before we get to a place where it's too late. The BC Nurses Union has done a lot of surveying in the last while around workforce mental health, particularly as it relates to nurses. But what we're really seeing, and Kim talked a little bit about this as well, is that increase in workload is having a huge impact on the moral distress that we're feeling in the workplace. And so what are some ways that we can promote psychological safety to help deal with some of the impacts of just one of the big system factors that we're seeing in the workplace right now? What we're also seeing is that, unfortunately, one of the biggest populations that's being impacted by the lack of psychological safety, by the increase in moral injury in the workplace right now, is our young nurses. So nurses who are new to the workforce, who are coming in. And you can see in this BCNU survey that young nurses are disproportionately affected by the impacts on the system, which is really too bad, because this is actually the portion of our workforce that we need to focus in on more strongly, so that we can get them to stay and continue their careers and continue their calling to serve as nurses. At the key to doing this is really around supporting what they have to say and the solutions that they bring forward from their perspective in a way that creates environments that support them. So we know that there's a lot of benefit to having psychological safety in the workplace. What we want to be able to do is really focus in on some practical ways that we can do that. I had an example when I went into the hospital a little while ago with my dad, who was receiving care, and the nurse came in to take care of him, and she went to check his blood pressure, and she kept pressing the machine on the wall, and she was wondering why it wasn't reading properly. And so I leaned over and I quietly said to her, I said, I think you have to put the arm cuff on before you turn the machine on. And she was mortified. And of course, but in that, we started to have a conversation around her and her career, and she was actually a grad nurse, and she actually had a patient load of 8 patients, and there was one nurse that was walking around in between 4 different units that day to provide support and mentorship to the other herself and the other grad nurses that were working with full patient loads on that unit that day. And so when we put people into situations where there is no safety and there is no support, we will continue to see the high turnover and the absenteeism, and people not wanting to come into nursing as a career or into healthcare as a career. And so creating environments where it's safe to raise your hand and say, this actually isn't safe. I actually don't feel like I'm competent to provide care in this space right now, because I shouldn't be looking after 12 patients all on my own. That becomes a really important way to start to create psychologically safe environments, but also to decrease that moral injury that we cause when we force people into those situations with no ability to raise their hands to talk about how unsafe they feel. So there's a lot of benefits to psychological safety. And I think that one of the most important that I already talked about is around that ability to prevent the moral injury that is driving people out of the workforce right now. And so how do we allow people to raise their hands when they made a mistake and say, ooh, I made this mistake and I really don't want anyone else to make it, so I'm going to share this story with all of you. And it becomes really important to create that space as a leader and as a colleague, so that your team can do that and help create a sense of agency for people. So I have the ability to actually change how things happen in my workplace. And those are all ways that we can create psychological safety and help the people who are doing the work make changes to how the work is done, which is how we will actually create better work environments. So as an organization, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. I'm not going to get into all of them, but you really need to create systems that actually create the expectation that you are listening to people and doing something about it. So how do we start to put into play things like daily huddles where we're listening and saying, hey, what are the safety issues that you think you're going to experience today? Let's talk about that. Let's get ahead of that a little bit. Oh, today we have 3 new people, or we have 4 grad nurses working with us today. How are we going to explicitly support them to make sure that they're successful today? And how do we raise our hand when we have an issue that's worrying us? So really starting to create those structures that allow for voice, and really starting to hold leaders accountable to lead in ways that promote psychological safety. There's lots more work around that and how you can really support leadership expectations in your organization. As a leader yourself, you can really help your team feel that their voice is heard by ensuring that you are connecting with them, that you are providing that compassion to them that you provide to yourself. So really how well you are taking care of yourself and providing yourself with that self-compassion that allows you then to give that to your team members, allows them to connect and feel safe to bring forward issues to you. And so as a new nurse coming into healthcare, the ability to share with your team and with your leader what's important to you, what scares you, where you're nervous about your own skills. Not only does this prevent moral injury, but it also improves outcomes for patients. So taking care of the people who work in healthcare actually creates environments that provide better patient outcomes. And that's what we want in the system, is the people that provide the care to be well taken care of, and the people who receive the care to get the best care possible. So workers know what needs to happen in healthcare to make it better. And young nurses in particular have amazing insight into new ideas and energy that are going to make our healthcare system more sustainable in the long run. And we need to create environments where young nurses can see themselves staying and finding their calling. But we have to start by listening. And that's what psychological safety is all about. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks so much, Victoria. It's so wonderful to see it tunneled down now. Kimberly providing us with that wonderful framework, and Victoria starting to draw in the practical realities of what's going on actually in the grassroots workplaces. I think it's starting to really weigh on me, perhaps, or be clearer for me how important organizational structural supports are. I feel like sometimes new graduates come in, students anticipate transitioning, hoping that they as individuals can do what they need to do to help themselves. But a recent interview that I did with one of the residents in our national nurse residency program, which is currently being piloted across Canada, made it so clear to me that because the structures were there and they were implemented, the expectations were already set, that this is a resident and this is how you would treat a resident. You don't give them a full workload, you never float them. They're always supernumerary, and those structures were respected. There's no doubt in my mind that that resident has had a different kind of experience than those who are not supported in a formal way. So speaking of that, we now have 2 speakers. We're going to start with Alisha D'Souza, and Alisha is the new graduate advocate with the Canadian Nursing Students Association. Alisha is currently completing at the very end, yay, of her accelerated BSc at McMaster University, and she's very excited about what the future holds for her as a new graduate nurse. She currently works in the hematology, oncology, and critical care units, respectively, at the Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto. Inspired by her sister's experience of childhood critical illness, Alisha aims to advocate for the prioritization of child and youth health and well-being in policy, and is currently doing so through her work with UNICEF Canada, the Young Canadians Roundtable on Health, and Campfire Circle. passionate about leadership and transition to practice. Alisha serves as the new graduate advocate, as I mentioned, through the Canadian Nursing Students Association. And we are so pleased to have such a strong relationship with Alisha and the CNSA. So Alisha, take it away.
Hi, thanks so much, Judy. As mentioned, my name is Alisha. I use she, her pronouns, and I just want to do my own quick land acknowledgement, but I'm speaking today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot Nations, which you might know colonially as Mississauga, Ontario. I just recently completed the second entry accelerated nursing program at McMaster University, which is located in Hamilton, Ontario. And I'm really proud to be here today representing the CNSA as the new grad advocate on their board of directors. I just wanted to start by saying thank you to Judy for hosting this, and also to Kim and Victoria for all the work you do and for really summing that up and sharing that with us today, because the things you are doing are the exact things that I am constantly thinking about as someone entering the workforce. I think that some of those statistics that were shared today, while alarming, came not really at any surprise to many of us. And as a student, from my observations, I can definitely say the impacts of the pandemic have been long lasting and are evident to me in my placement settings, especially by the visibly ongoing challenges that we're seeing, such as continued short staffing, unsafe ratios, compassion fatigue, and also mental health concerns, as Kimberly was speaking about earlier. And these are not concerns just faced by the people who are currently nurses, but also by my instructors, my peers, and everyone who's really involved in the unit who's helping it to function on a daily basis. For myself, as a new grad who is preparing to write the NCLEX, I actually just booked my registration, so hopefully I'll get permission to write soon. And I'm hoping to begin working shortly. I think that some of the first things that come to my mind when I think about the workplace I want to be in is how they are going to support me from the moral injury and the burnout that you've both highlighted. And I know that Judy had previously mentioned the CASN residency, which I'm really excited to see how the pilot turns out and to see if it'll be implemented in the future. I hope there's really great things ahead for that. Something I wanted to just kind of say right away is that I don't love the use of battle language in healthcare. However, I will say that entering in a post-COVID era, it often feels that we are being left in the clearing after the fight of what the last few years was. We're in an environment that is more short-staffed than ever, and where many of my classmates are actually trying to figure out how and when they can leave the bedside before they've even started at it. That is the fear that is being perpetuated. We are so scared of what others tell us about what to expect when we get there that we are looking at escape routes from a career not yet started. And that's something that's really important to think about when we think about what new grads are facing. I can recall walking into some of my previous placements and having those around me express stress and frustration, or how they don't want to be there or hate their lives at 8 a.m. I can recall a friend telling me about how there was one shift where the only people on the floor were she, her preceptor, one other nurse, and the charge nurse, there to look after 16 patients. So as a mid-level learner, that's an environment that her preceptor was likely unsupported themselves to begin with, and now has to extend themselves further to support her learning. And I know that Victoria mentioned something similar with the overburdened unit. How can we support others, especially learners on the unit, if we can't support ourselves in that unit? And that is something that really scares me as a new grad. I think about how I would feel if I were one of 2 nurses on a floor with 16 acute patients and a charge nurse. And I think of how terrified I would be to make a mistake, and how shattered I would feel if that mistake resulted in harm. And I also think about how the system might tell me that it was my fault. And I know that that's something that was mentioned today. The idea of safe reporting, the idea of encouraging a place where new grads can really learn. And so when I think of the future I want in nursing, I think about safety and trust and growth and how I can support my patients. I also think of the leaders that I want to see and the leaders that will support me to thrive and prioritize my physical and mental health. I hope that there are programs. I know that there are often programs to support mental health. I've seen it myself. However, a lot of the times they're only after something happens and not in a preventative way. I really envision a future where there is a culture of reporting errors and finding ways to prevent them without placing individual blame. And I think really, when I think about what I want the future of nursing to be, I think about the kind of nurse I'd want for my loved ones or for myself. So I know I've spoken a lot about things that sound really, really sad, but really, I think that don't quote me on the philosopher, but there's a philosopher who I remember was he was killed because of how much he criticized the youth and criticized what was currently happening. And when asked about it, he said that it wasn't that he doesn't believe in it, it's that he believes in it so strongly that he is willing to criticize it. And that's exactly how I feel right now. I think that the future of nursing is really bright, and I believe strongly that it is not without hope or reason to advocate for. So I know that thanks to the research being done and to leaders like those who've spoken today before me, thank you, Kim Victoria, again, that I'm not really alone in those feelings and that I do believe that change is coming. And I know that because I know there are people who care and who are paving the way so that new grads like me can start nursing and can stay in nursing. So I think what I really wanted to say is that we're entering an environment where there's a lot going on and where we can feel the stress of the nurses who were there before us. But the new grads who are entering, they are here and they know what they want, they're asking for it, and they're prepared to get it. And we really need our leaders to deliver it and to create that environment collaboratively. So I don't think I reached the hopeful 8 to 10 minutes of speaking, but thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to really share what I'm facing going in and all the thoughts that flood my mind as a new graduate nurse.
Thank you so much, Alisha. And Kaur Patel had put their hand up, so I'm not sure if you wanted to.
Yeah, my apologies. That was an accident, but that was a great presentation. I love to hear all of that. Great job, Alisha.
Well, wonderful. I guess that wasn't an accident. Kimberly, did you have your hand up?
Sorry, it was an accident as well.
All right, but thank you so much for your.
It was a wonderful presentation, Alisha and Victoria. Very well.
I just wanted to thank you, Alisha. I'm sure I'm not alone when I say I was humbled by your transparency and your honesty and your courage in bringing to all of us the things that we need to think about when we think about new graduates going into the practice area. Before I get to Madison, I did want to say that I was drawn to Kimberly's original information on, and I think it was a quote that the new graduate had shared, that they felt guilty because they needed all that support. They weren't getting it, and they felt concerned, and validly so, that the delays in the care, because they couldn't get the support that they needed, might result in some injurious situation for a patient or family. And I know so many new graduates that have described that. So I think ensuring that those graduates have that supportive, encouraging, compassionate mentor is a critical part of what we do as leaders, is providing that opportunity. So we have our final speaker, Madison. Sorry, Madison. Madison is a first-year BSN student at the University of Ottawa with work experience in healthcare for over the past 12 years in positions like community housing for people with mental health and addictions, working with the Red Cross in long-term care homes during COVID, which, as we know, was one of the most stressful places to work. So thank you for your commitment, Madison, and currently works as a personal care attendant at a regional hospital. Madison joined CNSA so she could bring 2 SLGBTQIA+ representation to nursing student organizations, and it's allowed her to advocate for a more inclusive curriculum with initiatives like gender inclusive language and education on non-cisgendered healthcare. As a trans woman, Madison anticipates making positive changes to ensure all 2SLGBTQIA+ students and nurses feel safe and respected in the profession. So Madison, we're looking very forward to your comments.
Awesome, thanks. That acronym is getting longer and longer, and it's harder and harder to say, so you did a really good job. So yeah, I'm Madison. I'm basically going to be speaking about my perspective of someone who's like worked during COVID, I've and some of the things that I've experienced since I came out as trans. To go back to some of the topics of moral injury and yeah, how things were like during the pandemic. I was working in a fairly large building with very low staff for how many people we were supposed to take care of. As most of the time we were two healthcare staff in charge of giving about 90 people their medication over the course of the day. And we also had to manage like a lot of mental health care crises because it was a building that housed people with mental health and addiction issues. So they had a lot of stress going on. Our management at the time had currently like no background in any healthcare. They came from like a business degree, and they ended up outsourcing their decision making because once COVID hit to people that I don't even know where they were. They weren't inside the building. We did have nurses working there, but they weren't really consulted about anything. And we were told that like I one of the biggest things that I could remember is we were told that we needed to wear a single isolation gown all day made of rubber. And I know how like a lot of you probably know how awful they are and how ineffective that would be. So a lot of the times we would end up leaving completely exhausted, morally defeated that management wasn't listening to us, that were saying, hey, this isn't how you use this PPE. And they were making demands saying, hey, you have to wear this single reusable gown all day, but you can't change it. And we were leaving exhausted, sweaty, because those things have their own weather systems. It's really awful. And yeah, so basically that led me to leave my job because I couldn't continue doing that. It was a lot of work to travel around multiple floors, personally having to give 45 people their medication. I know a lot of you know how awful that would be, especially when every single person is dealing with some sort of mental health issue. So I left the job and ended up working for the Red Cross during COVID, which was also pretty stressful because a lot of the homes I ended up working with had very large issues. They were some of the worst hit places in Ontario. Uh, a lot of the places I went into were the same places that the military got called into because staff left, there were shortages, and ended up having a lot of neglect seen. A lot of the places I worked, 30% of the building had died within 2 weeks, which is tragic to say the least, especially with the staff that did actually stay along because these people had relationships with their residents and their patients. And yeah, I saw a lot of awful things, and that was morally defeating too. So you see things like families getting locked out of the building and people watching their families die in the bed from the window, and they're not being allowed in because that's the rules at the time. After that, decided to go into nursing myself because it's easier to make changes as a nurse than a PSW. To move away from COVID and that awful time, I guess more recently I came out as trans, and some of the hardest things I've had to deal with that are my the administration mostly not being able to use my preferred name, not supported by some of the staff on the floor, some patients being hostile towards me, and then some things not directed towards me personally, but things like hate crimes by staff members directed at like the entire 2S LGBTQA plus community. So I guess going on to people trying to use my preferred name, I've had to send emails to HR, my manager, scheduling, and to this day, scheduling still calls me and asks for my dead name. So it's been about since Christmas that I put in the request that they officially change everything. And they do have my preferred name on their file. So they have it, and every time they call and ask for my dead name, I say, that's not me. Can you ask for my preferred name? And they immediately switch, so I know they have it. Also, where I work, there's the way they do their assignments is scheduling will send your name to the floor that you're working on, and then they send my dead name. So everybody writes down my dead name on their sheet, and I have to go around and basically come out every day at work telling people individually like, hey, can you please not call me that? So that's pretty difficult because it's just a stressful thing, especially when a lot of the staff aren't very supportive. I don't want to say it's not everybody, because there definitely is a large portion that are. I did have one nurse, the charge nurse at the time, when I mentioned that, like, hey, this is kind of stressful. She immediately went on and took all of that responsibility for herself and called everybody over on the floor all together at the same time and said, hey, scratch this person's name out, change it to Madison. And that was awesome. That was something super supportive that I never thought I would see. And that honestly was probably one of the most positive things I've experienced since coming out at work, at least. Like how it affected me is that, like, yeah, the people that aren't supportive are, as soon as I tell them and they go and start changing like my workload or something. I do have some charge nurses that once they find out like, oh, it's a trans person coming, they'll give me twice the workload I see as the other unregulated or the other PCAs. And I don't really feel like I can complain because as soon as I start complaining, you get some extra stigma attached to you. I feel like they get a reason to complain about you. They can tell, oh, you're just lazy and complaining about stuff. You're always just trying to make trouble. Oh, first you want me to change your name, and now you want me to change your workload to make it lighter for you. When it's like, I'm not new to this. I've been in healthcare for 12 years now, and I know what's a reasonable workload for one person to manage. And I can see on my sheet the amount of work everybody else gets. They all have half the people I have, and mine are all difficult. Two people like transfers, two people everything. So that's pretty stressful and having to do that. And a lot of people aren't also even willing to change my name. I had one staff member basically fight me on it and go around to each other person and say, don't listen to her, change your name back, stuff like that. So it could be pretty stressful going into work sometimes, not knowing like who am I going to be working with? Are they going to be supportive? Yeah, and I feel like I always, even when I do have like a reasonable workload and having a good day and everybody's being really kind to me, that I really can't take the time to relax and, take a break whenever it's my turn, because the way people will perceive me is like, oh, I want them to see me as like a hardworking person and trying my best. And I think a lot of people will try to use any little excuse they can, and as soon as they see you sitting down, it's like, oh, this person's lazy, and then other whatever else they want to say, and basically like put my identity in front of the work I'm doing, which is really stressful. Some things that have happened at the hospital that I worked at was that some people were ripping down any posters that had anything positive about to us LGBTQI plus people. They were leaving hate mail in people's offices if they had a pride flag up, stuff like that. And then to go back to something like the what happened with like administration, they basically didn't do anything about it. They ended up putting out a statement eventually, but it kind of fell short of doing anything. There was no repercussions for the staff. Wasn't critical of what the person did or set up any expectations or repercussions if it would happen again. Since then, they've made a plan to promote an inclusive workplace, but it's already receiving some backlash. Yeah, and it was just like a roadmap of things like, hey, these are things we're going to try to improve in the future, saying, hey, we're going to try to make people feel more comfortable. And that was basically all they had in the plan. And even that's received some backlash. So things like making an inclusive workplace and actually enforcing some policies and basically laws too. Feel like ripping down people's pride flags and leaving them hate mail would constitute as a hate crime, and depends on where you work, I guess. Um, so yeah, to like wrap that up into like how it's affected me like with moral injury, I feel like just not supported a lot of the times, and it's really affected how I pick up shifts. I really don't do it when I don't have to. Obviously, I need money to live, and that's basically the amount that I work, just enough to basically get by, because going into work is more stressful than it had to be, really. Yeah. Thanks for listening to me, and I don't really have much else.
Madison, I just don't even know what to say. I'm just really quite overwhelmed with that sharing. So respectfully grateful to you for sharing. I just don't know what to say, because it's almost like just don't do all those things that Madison talked about. I mean, that basically that's it just seems like a no-brainer to me. How can we as caring, compassionate professionals treat other individuals that way? It sometimes just alarms and worries me. And I can't imagine how someone who is treated like that would want to come back to work. So thank you, Madison. It's so clear to me that you have so much to share and offer to your patients and their families. And we need to take away the obstacles to your providing or being free to reveal all those wonderful attributes that you have when in care with your patients. Kate, I'm wondering if there are any questions that have come up.
I
Yes.
don't currently have any questions, pardon me. But we do have some excellent winners of our book draw, if I'm okay to share those names.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I would love to announce that Monica has won a copy of Judy's amazing guide to everything new grad called From Surviving to Thriving, Navigating the First Year of Professional Nursing Practice, as has Janelle Shentag. Janelle has actually won The Fearless Organization, Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace for Learning, Innovation, and Growth. And that's sponsored by Victoria of Switch BC. And she's also sponsoring another copy that's been given to our lovely Doreen Stewart, who we care about so much in the world of new graduate supporters. So we're thrilled that she's won that copy. And then finally, Laura G has also won Judy's book, From Surviving to Thriving. So those participants have shared their addresses. And like Judy has mentioned in the chat, we will be sending some feedback from this series, some evaluation forms, and you'll actually have another chance to win Judy's book. And I can tell you that as someone who received it as a new grad from my healthcare organization, it was incredibly impactful in the way that I understood it, because it's very relatable. The embedding of quotes and personal stories is really sort of a pinpoint in how you can relate to the work within it. So please fill out the evaluation, and I think we have a couple more minutes for you to direct message me any questions you have. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kate. Kate is the program coordinator for Nursing the Future. And we would encourage you, maybe Kate, you can throw the Nursing the Future website in there, just in case individuals are not yet familiar with our content. And as Victoria had mentioned early on in the presentation, Trace Hobson, Victoria Schmid, her healthcare powerhouse husband, John Schmid, and myself were thrilled to talk for an hour on creating safe spaces for healthcare in general. So those of you who attended this session might be quite interested in listening to that one. So I think that we are just beyond our time period. And so I don't want to take more time than is allotted, but I wanted to thank from my heart, Kimberly, Victoria, Alisha, and Madison for spending so much time and so much energy and speaking from their hearts about a topic that's so pivotal to the future of our healthcare professions. I thank all of you and hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Judy and everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.